The Trylar Empire brutally murdered a human girl, and her brother will make them regret it by killing every last one of the alien bastards. Will Hicks hunched over the grimy bar on the Nausicaan-controlled shithole of Zarkos, slamming back shots of the foulest rotgut booze 50 credits could buy. He needed to numb the pain on this dark anniversary, a decade since his baby sister's guts were ripped out by those sadistic Nausicaan fucks. Hicks had crashed on this rock running smuggled weapons to resistance fighters. The Nausicans swarmed his ship, captured him and his 16-year-old sister. For sick shits and giggles, the alien overseer Tharos slowly flayed her alive in front of Hicks. He couldn't do a goddamn thing, chained and forced to watch her die screaming for hours. 10 years later, the impotent rage and guilt still ate at him, knowing he'd failed her when she needed him most. Suddenly 5 huge Nausicans stormed in, yelling and waving plasma rifles. The leader swaggered over and slapped Hicks' drink to the floor. "Little human shit licking up your swill. Your kind exists to clean our toilets and fill our bellies. Put down the glass and get on your knees where you belong." Hicks saw red. He knew he was outgunned, but no way in hell would he let that stand. In a blur, he smashed the shot glass into the asshole's eye, grabbed him as a meat shield, drew the leader's sidearm, and blasted the other 4 Nausicans before they could blink. Panting, he shoved the dead weight away only to face his worst nightmare. Tharos, the sadist who killed his sister, somehow still alive despite half his skull being gone. "I gutted your sister like a pig and made you watch. Now I'll do the same to you," Tharos gargled, his lipless mouth twisting into a macabre grin. "Just fucking try it," Hicks snarled, raising the gun. "Please." Suddenly, an EMP blast killed the bar's power. Hicks dove for cover as the windows imploded, and a Nausicaan kill team in black armor poured in. Hicks returned fire, praying he could hold them off long enough to finish Tharos once and for all. If he died tonight, he'd damn well take that sister-killing son of a bitch with him to hell. Hicks fired wildly into the swarm of Nausicans pouring through the shattered windows. His shots went wide, pinging off the metal walls. He ducked down, pulse blasts sizzling overhead, the acrid stench of ozone filling his nose. Fuck, only 1 power cell left. He popped up, spraying the last of his juice at the ugly bastards. A near miss took off a chunk of his ear, blood pouring down his neck. He dropped behind the bar, scrabbling for a weapon, a bottle, anything to fight with. But he knew it was over. He was fucked. Suddenly the air shimmered next to him, and a cloaked figure appeared out of thin air. The mysterious arrival hefted a plasma carbine, the weapon humming with power. Armor-piercing rounds sliced through the Nausicans like a chainsaw through putty, dropping the aliens left and right. Rivers of viscous blood splattered the floor. "Come with me if you want to live," a digitized voice spoke from beneath the reflective helmet. Hicks stared up at his savior, shocked. But hell, he wasn't about to look a gift merc in the mouth. He scrambled to his feet, following the stranger to a concealed hatch in the floor he'd never noticed before. They plunged into a dimly lit access tunnel, the sounds of Nausicaan reinforcements echoing behind them. The tunnel ended in a hangar bay housing a sleek, deadly-looking ship. Hicks didn't recognize the design. They sprinted aboard, the hatch ceiling shut behind them. Hicks collapsed into a crash seat, lungs burning, adrenaline still surging through his veins. The cloaked figure regarded him impassively before reaching up and removing the helmet. Hicks gawked in disbelief. Standing before him was an attractive human woman. Her close-cropped hair shot through with gleaming cybernetic implants. "Mara Corvus, Trylar Rebellion," she said curtly, setting her helmet aside. Her gaze flickered over him, assessing. "You made quite the scene back there. Tharos won't soon forget it." Mara arched an eyebrow. "You really don't know. We're the human resistance fighting to overthrow the Nausicaan occupation of Earth. The Tyrlars came 50 years ago as merchants and friends. Then they bombed us back to the Stone Age from orbit and turned humanity into a slave race. The Nausicans are their attack dogs, cruel, sadistic bastards, everyone. Earth, occupied, enslaved. It seemed impossible. Hicks had been on the fringe for years, taking merc work, running guns, lost in an endless bender. Had he really missed an alien invasion? I've seen your file, Mara continued. Former Special Ops, dishonorably discharged, been in the wind for a decade, plus a real hard-on for killing Nausicaans. We could use a man like you in the rebellion. Hicks stared at the deck plates. A chance to fight for something bigger than himself, maybe even make a difference. No, he couldn't go down that road again. He was good at one thing, killing, and he'd keep doing it, one score-settling merc job at a time. Wash, rinse, repeat, at least until some alien fuck got lucky and put him in the ground. Thanks, but no thanks, Hicks growled. Just drop me off somewhere I can catch a freighter. I need a fucking drink. Mara's eyes hardened. Suit yourself, she replied coldly. We'll be over Carlos Station in an hour. You can hop off there, and if you change your mind... She tossed him a small metallic disc. You know how to find us. The ship lurched as Mara fired the thrusters, and they roared out of the hangar. On the scanner, a squadron of Nausicaan fighters scrambled to pursue. Mara angled the ship into a steep climb, racing for open space. The enemy ships closed in, plasma cannons charging. Suddenly Mara cut the engines and flipped the ship end over end in a death-defying somersault. Disruptor pulses lanced out from the wingtips, raking the Nausicaan formation. The fighters scattered, two of them erupting into blossoms of flame. Mara punched the accelerator, and the ship hurtled into the void, the twinkling stars stretching into shimmering lines as they left Zarkos far behind. Mara's ship touched down on the landing pad of a grimy mining colony on the ass end of nowhere. Hicks stepped off, a scowl etched on his face. He glanced back at Mara, but she didn't say a word, just sealed the hatch and lifted off without so much as a backward glance. Typical rebel bitch. Hicks shouldered his duffel and headed into the colony, aiming to pick up where he left off. Booze and merc work, the only constants in his miserable life. The days blurred together in a haze of cheap whiskey and shitty odd jobs. Hicks took courier gigs, ran some freight, cracked a few skulls when the local miners got restless, anything to keep the demons at bay. But every night he saw his sister's face, twisted in agony as that sadist Tharos peeled her flesh away. The rage simmered, ready to boil over. It all came to a head in a dive bar near the refinery. Hicks was on his 10th shot of rotgut when a pack of Nausicaan mercs swaggered in, leering at the human patrons like fresh meat. The leader, a hulking beast with a plasma scar across his snout, zeroed in on Hicks. Well, look what we got here, boys. Little human piggy, Tharas's most wanted. Bounty on your head could buy us all new ships. Hicks gritted his teeth, knuckles white on his glass. He tried to block them out, but they kept needling. What's the matter, piggy? Too scared to face us without your rebel slut? Heard she dropped you like bad habit. Guess Tharos cutting up your sister like a side of beef broke you good. Hicks saw red. The shot glass shattered in his fist. He lunged at the lead Nausicaan, a roar tearing from his throat. 10 years of grief and guilt and hate poured out as he pummeled the bastard, fists smashing into the leathery face. The other mercs piled on, pounding at him, but Hicks was an unleashed berserker. The blast rattled Hicks's bones, fire erupting as the tank ruptured. The Nausicaans forgotten, he ran for his life, secondary explosions chasing his heels. He barely made it to the docks before the entire colony went up, the blaze consuming hab blocks and equipment sheds. Heart pounding, lungs seared by smoke, Hicks stumbled to a beat-up freighter, a Proxima-class junker. His hands shook as he hot-wired the ignition and wrenched back on the stick. The ship wheezed and coughed. Then the jets caught and he was slammed back in the seat as it hurtled into the black. Hicks clutched the controls, fighting to steady his breath. His mind raced, the merc's words echoing. Tharos wanted him bad. The sadistic fuck would never stop hunting, and he'd tear apart anyone in his way, just like Ellie. No, Hicks couldn't let Tharos rack up more innocent kills. This ended now. He couldn't run anymore. The rebellion needed him. Humanity needed him. Hicks plugged in the coordinates Mara gave him, praying it wasn't too late to join the fight, to make his life mean something more than blood and booze. The freighter lurched as it dropped out of warp. Hicks peered out the view screen to see nothing. Empty space, not a star in sight. What the fuck? Suddenly, The blackness rippled and a small ship materialized. The same stealthy courier Mara had rescued him in. The hail pinged and he hit accept. Mara's face filled the screen, her expression unsurprised. "About time, Hicks. I always knew you'd come around." "Save it. You gonna shoot me or not?" "The rebellion needs soldiers," Mara continued. "Our leader thinks you could be an asset, especially against Tharos." Hicks's gut clenched at the name. Asset? More like bait. But what choice did he have? Keep running with a target on his back? Or fight for something bigger than himself? "I'm in," he said, "on one condition. I get to personally put a bullet between Tharos's eyes." Mara's smile was cold as space. "You'll get your shot, but there's someone you need to meet first." She transmitted docking codes and closed the link. Hicks guided the freighter into the courier's cramped hangar, the hull groaning. He was committed now, for better or worse. He followed Mara into the ship proper, eyeing the sleek silhouette. Bleeding edge tech, unlike anything he'd seen before. She led him onto the command deck, a cramped room dominated by the most complex control console imaginable. The ship lurched, and the stars stretched into lines as they hurtled into light speed. "Where are we going?" Hicks asked. "Some hidden rebel base?" The ship shuddered as it dropped back into real space on the fringe of the solar system. Hicks stared out the view screen at a massive field of icy rocks, the remnants of failed planets. Mara guided them into the densest section of the belt. Suddenly, a titanic structure materialized out of the black, a sprawling space station bristling with anti-ship batteries. Mara transmitted a clearance code, and they slipped through the cavernous landing bay doors. Inside, the hangar swarmed with activity, engineers swarming over battered fighters, soldiers drilling on the deck, droids hauling munitions. Hicks drank it in, amazed the rebellion had survived in secret for so long. "This way," Mara said crisply, leading him off the courier. "The commander is waiting." She guided him through labyrinthine hallways, past armories and briefing rooms. Everywhere Hicks looked, he saw humans working feverishly, decoding intercepted messages, cleaning rifles, stitching up wounds. His estimation of the rebellion ticked up a notch. These people were the real deal. Finally, they reached a reinforced door, guarded by a pair of stone-faced rebels. Mara nodded and they waved her through, eyeing Hicks suspiciously. He followed her into a war room, dominated by a massive holoprojector showing a star map of Trylar space. A grizzled, one-armed man glanced up from the display, his eyes hard as flint. He wore a commander's insignia on his shoulder, and his skin was crisscrossed with plasma burns. "Will Hicks," the man said, his voice a low rasp. "I never thought I'd see you this side of a whiskey bottle. I'm Cade Terex. Welcome to the rebellion." "With all due respect, sir, I'm not here for a welcome. I'm here to kill Nausicaans." Terex nodded grimly. "You'll get your chance, soldier. We're going to hit those sadistic fucks where it hurts, their Supreme Commander Tharos, the Butcher himself." Hicks's blood ran cold. He clenched his fists, barely feeling his nails cut into his palms. "Tharos is mine," he snarled. Terex held up his metal hand. "I know what he did to your sister. Believe me, we all have lost someone to those monsters, but this is bigger than you. Killing Tharos isn't about revenge. It's about breaking the Nausicaan spirit, proving they aren't the soulless killing machines the Trylar's programmed them to be. If we cut off the head, the body will flounder." He jabbed a finger at the star map, enlarging a system on the fringe. Our spies identified a weak point in their defenses, a single space station orbiting Irksul Minor. Tharos uses it as a command post, but it's remote, undermanned, the perfect target. Hicks studied the schematic, his mind racing. One station in the ass-crack of space sounded like a textbook raid to him. Get in, geek the bastard, and bail. Mara stepped forward. "There's only one problem. The station is protected by a DNA-encoded defense grid. Any ship that isn't broadcasting Tharos's genetic signature gets vaporized." A ghost of a smile flickered across Terex's face. "That's where you come in, Hicks. If anyone has a shot of cracking Tharos's sanctum, it's the man he wants dead more than anyone. The commander gestured to Mara. Corvus is our best infiltrator. She'll get you to the station, but the kill is yours. Terex extended his metal hand, his eyes boring into Hicks. You do this, you'll be striking a blow for every human in the galaxy. The rebellion will never forget. Neither will the Norsicans. Are you in? The Trylar strike force opened fire, plasma bolts stitching the air. Hicks ducked, shielding his face as the window shattered, raining crystalline shards. Mara yanked him toward the jagged opening, monomolecular blade flashing as she sliced a clear path. Tharos roared in rage, plasma axe crackling. He lunged, the axe hissing through the space Hicks's head had occupied a split second before. Hicks rolled, kicking out, his boot connecting with the Norsican's knee with a sickening crunch. Tharos howled, but kept coming. "Kill them!" the real Zorkash bellowed, his face purple with fury. The strike force advanced, plasma fire intensifying. Mara shoved Hicks toward the shattered window. "Jump!" Hicks looked at her like she was insane. They were 50 stories up, but the alternative was a plasma bolt to the face. Cursing, he leaped. For a terrifying moment he was in freefall, the wind screaming past his ears, whipping his clothes. Then something slammed into his back, Mara, arms wrapping around his chest. She slapped something on his armor, and it went rigid, the compound instantly hardening into a glider wing. They arrowed between the towering spires of the command complex, plasma fire from the shattered window sizzling past. Hicks gritted his teeth, the wing's servos whining with the strain, as Mara banked hard, trying to evade. "Where the hell are we going?" Hicks shouted over the howling wind. "Landing platform," Mara yelled back. "Terex's extraction team." Hicks squinted, barely able to make out a small pad jutting from a distant tower through the aerial battle raging around them. Rebellion fighters buzzing Trylar interceptors, missiles and laser fire crisscrossing the sky. Mara threw her weight to the side, narrowly avoiding a plasma blast that would have taken Hicks's head off. The wing shuddered, losing altitude fast. Hicks's gut clenched. They were coming in too hot. At the last second, Mara hit the quick release. The wing crumpled and they dropped, Mara rolling as she hit the platform in a perfect paratrooper landing. Hicks wasn't so lucky. He crashed hard, the wind knocked out of him, stars detonating behind his eyes. "On your feet, soldier," Mara snapped, dragging him upright. Hicks staggered, his head swimming. The platform was swarming with Trylar warriors laying down suppressing fire. At the far end was their ticket out, a heavily armored rebellion dropship, ramp lowered, Terex gesturing to them frantically from the hold. "Move!" Mara shoved Hicks, plasma scorching the deck plates where he'd been standing. They bolted for the dropship, keeping low, blaster bolts cracking past. A Trylar trooper loomed before Hicks, rifle aimed squarely at his chest. Hicks reacted on instinct, grabbing the gun barrel and wrenching it up as it discharged. The trooper snarled, lashing out with a gauntleted fist. Hicks sidestepped, the blow glancing off his temple, and ripped the rifle away, ramming the stock into the Trylar's throat. The trooper crumpled and Hicks leaped over him, breath ragged, heart thundering. The ramp was only meters away. Mara was already aboard, laying down covering fire. Hicks put on a burst of speed, his legs pumping. He could hear the dropship's engines screaming as Terex prepared for liftoff. Suddenly, a crackling electric whip coiled around Hicks's ankle, yanking him off his feet. He slammed face first into the deck plates, blood filling his mouth. He twisted, trying to pull free, but the whip held fast. He looked up into the smouldering eyes of Tharos, triumph etched on the Norsican's face. "You're not going anywhere," Tharos snarled, raising the plasma axe for a killing blow. "I made a promise to the universe that I would butcher you like I did your sister." Mara screamed Hicks's name, but it was drowned out by the axe's building whine as it slashed down. Time slowed as the plasma axe hurtled down, the air crackling with ozone. Hicks twisted desperately, knowing he couldn't dodge the killing blow. Suddenly, Mara's monomolecular blade flashed, slicing through the whip coiled around Hicks' ankle. Freed, he rolled, the axe skittering off the deck plates in a shower of sparks. Hicks scrambled to his feet as Tharos roared in fury, raising the axe again. But Mara was already moving, hurling a disc that stuck to Tharos's armor and beeped ominously. She grabbed Hicks and sprinted for the shattered window. They leaped into open air a split second before the disc detonated, the blast wave slamming into their backs and hurling them away from the tower in a cloud of pulverized steel and shattered glass. Mara slapped Hicks's armor, and it went rigid again, the wings snapping open. They caught an updraft, the wind screaming past as they banked hard. Plasma bolts sizzled by, far too close for comfort. Hicks risked a glance back to see a swarm of Trylar gunships in pursuit, cannons blazing. The bastards were out for blood. Mara swore, juking and jinking to evade the onslaught. A near miss seared Hicks' cheek, the stink of burnt hair filling his nose. "We can't outrun them," Hicks shouted over the gale. "We need a new plan." "I'm working on it," Mara yelled back, her face grim. She veered toward a cluster of towers bristling with antennae and pressed a button on her gauntlet. Instantly, a piercing shriek filled the air, so intense Hicks thought his eardrums would rupture. The Trylar ships faltered, spiraling out of control as their guidance systems went haywire. Mara killed the sonic disruptor and banked hard, arrowing between the towers. Hicks squinted through watering eyes to see a battered freighter dropping out of the clouds, its flight path erratic and labored. Terex waved to them frantically from the lowered cargo ramp, his other hand clutching a mounted plasma cannon. "Hold on!" Mara screamed. She slapped Hicks's armor again and the wing crumpled. They dropped like stones, the wind tearing at their clothes. The freighter loomed closer, its engines coughing and sputtering. They were coming in too fast. At the last second, Mara fired her grapple. It snagged the edge of the ramp and reeled them in, slamming them into the deck so hard Hicks saw stars. Terex hit the ramp control, and it sealed shut just as a barrage of plasma reduced the landing pad to slag. Hicks staggered to his feet as the ship lurched, the inertial dampeners straining. Mara shoved past him, sprinting for the cockpit. Terex was right behind her, his face thunderous. "What the hell happened down there?" he demanded, rounding on Hicks. "Where's Tharos? Did you complete the mission?" Hicks shook his head, wincing at the movement. His whole body felt like one giant bruise. "Tharos is still alive. That sadistic fuck was ready for us. The mission was a failure." Terex slammed his metal fist into the bulkhead so hard it dented. Damn it, we were so close. He ran his other hand over his scalp, seething. "We'll have to go to Plan B." Hicks frowned, a sinking feeling in his gut. "I'm almost afraid to ask, what's Plan B?" Terex met his gaze, his eyes hard as flint. "The rebellion has developed a bioweapon, engineered to target Nausicaan physiology. If we can't eliminate Tharos directly, we'll have to wipe out his entire depraved species." Hicks recoiled as if slapped. "What the fuck, genocide? Have you lost your mind?" Terex jabbed a finger at him, his voice rising. "The Nausicaans are monsters, Hicks. Soulless abominations. They live only to kill, maim, and destroy. If we don't end them, they'll keep enslaving and slaughtering until nothing is left." "Tharos murdered your sister, Hicks, tortured her to death in front of you. Are you really going to let him get away with that? Let him keep inflicting that sick cruelty on countless others? We have to stop him, no matter the cost." Hicks looked away, his jaw clenched. Terex was right. The Nausicaans were a plague, a blight on the galaxy. Hicks had seen firsthand the unspeakable things they were capable of. And yet, the thought of consigning an entire species to oblivion, even one as twisted as the Nausicaans, it felt wrong, like he'd be no better than them. Mara's voice crackled over the intercom, cutting through his reverie. "Approaching the asteroid field now. Scanners are picking up some strange readings from the weapons lab, possible signs of battle." Terex frowned, turning to the cockpit. "Battle? We're the only ones who knew that facility existed. Take us in, but keep your eyes peeled." The freighter shuddered as it entered the asteroid field, the hull groaning at the extreme course changes. Mara guided them through the spinning rocks with preternatural skill, the ship barely avoiding collision again and again. Finally, a massive asteroid loomed ahead, its surface pitted with craters and fissures. Set into one of the larger craters was a squat, heavily reinforced structure, bristling with antennae and sensor arrays. Mara brought the ship down on a landing pad just outside the main airlock, the landing gear sinking into the regolith. Hicks followed Terex and Mara out, pulse rifle at the ready. As soon as he set foot on the asteroid, a profound sense of wrongness washed over him. The facility was dark, its outer doors buckled and torn, as if wrenched open from within. Scorch marks and deep gouges marred the walls, and a foul, acrid stench hung in the recycled air. Terex unholstered his sidearm, his metal hand flexing. "Mara, get that door open. Hicks, watch R6, I don't like this." Mara knelt by the ruined airlock, working frantically to hotwire the mechanism. With a groan and a hiss, the inner door shuddered open, revealing a darkened corridor strewn with debris. Terex clicked on the lamp on his rifle and stepped inside, motioning for them to follow. They picked their way through the ruined passages, the beam of Terex's light playing over shattered equipment and buckled bulkheads. The facility had been ravaged by some unknown force, consoles smashed and walls ripped open as if by enormous claws. Yet there were no bodies, no signs of the scientists or guards who manned the lab. A chilling roar echoed through the darkness, so loud it made Hicks's bones shake. He whirled, rifle snapping up, but saw only shadows. The roar came again, closer, and a massive form detached itself from the gloom. Hicks felt his blood turn to ice water. It was a Nausicaan berserker, a genetically engineered abomination used to quell uprisings and crush resistance through sheer terror and brutality. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, the creature was a mass of bulging muscle and bristling spines, its hide covered in jagged bony plates. Its skull was a nightmare of fangs and horns, its eyes blazing with feral bloodlust. The berserker surged forward with terrifying speed, crossing the distance between them in heartbeats. Hicks opened fire, the pulse bolts sparking off its armored hide. The beast slammed into him like a freight train, its claws shredding through his armor like paper. Hicks screamed as razor talons raked his flesh, his blood splashing the deck. He tried to bring his rifle to bear, but the berserker ripped it from his hands, crushing it like a toy. Its jaws descended, rows of serrated fangs yawning wide. Hicks stared into that abyss, realization crashing over him with sickening clarity. He was about to die, just like his sister, torn to pieces by a Nausicaan monstrosity. The berserker's jaws closed around his head, the pressure incredible, its fetid breath scorching his face. The bone began to groan, about to shatter like an eggshell. A searing plasma bolt lanced through the berserker's skull, flash-boiling brain matter. The beast toppled like a felled tree, Hicks rolling clear as it crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. He looked up to see Mara at the mouth of the cave, her rifle's barrel glowing cherry red. "I can't leave you alone for a minute," she said wryly, extending a hand to help him up. Hicks took it gratefully, wincing as his torn flesh pulled. They staggered back to Terex, who clutched a strange cylinder, the bioweapon recovered from some hidden vault. A thunderous boom shook the cavern, showering them with dust and pebbles. They rushed to the entrance and froze. A massive Trylar warship hovered overhead, ramps extending like hungry tongues. Hundreds of Nausicaan shock troopers poured out, all fangs and claws and hate. At their head strode Tharos, plasma axe crackling. "Bring me their heads," he roared, his voice like a death knell. Hicks, Mara and Terex scattered, seeking what meager cover the asteroid's crags offered. They fought with pure, desperate savagery, rifles bucking, knives flashing, fists and feet hammering. Nausicaans fell in droves, blood painting the stones. But it wasn't enough. For every one they cut down, 10 more surged forward. They fell back, trading space for time, Nausicaan blades nipping at their heels. The twisting tunnels of the asteroid became a lethal maze, plasma bolts ricocheting off the walls. Terex stumbled, a hand clutched to his chest, blood seeping between his fingers. He thrust the bioweapon at Hicks. "Go," he coughed, a bloody froth on his lips. "Finish it." With a defiant bellow, he turned and charged the pursuing Nausicaans, laser fire stitching his back, buying Hicks and Mara a few precious seconds. They ran, lungs afire, the tunnels a blur. By some miracle, they reached their ship, the ramp still extended. Plasma bolts sizzled past as they leapt aboard. Mara fired the thrusters, and they rocketed away, the Trylar warship growing larger in the view screen. Its cannons swiveled to track them, the asteroid field lighting up with explosions. Mara jinked and juked, the ship groaning under the strain. A glancing hit sheared off a stabilizer fin, sending them into a wild spin. Mara fought the controls, teeth bared. At the last second, she wrenched them into a stomach-churning loop, the warship's cannons chewing up their own fighters. Then they were past, the stars blurring into lines as they hit FTL speeds. Hicks sagged back in his seat, the bioweapon heavy in his hands. He stared at its dull metallic cylinder, his expression bleak. "We can't use this," he said softly. "It's not who we are." Mara looked at him, her face etched with pain and exhaustion. Terex was wrong, she agreed. Genocide is the Trylar way. We have to be better than that. We have to find another way. Hicks nodded slowly, his tactical mind clicking into high gear. "We go for the head," he said, a cold certainty settling over him. "Cut off the serpent's head, and the body dies. We take the fight to Tharos." He brought up a star map, enlarging a remote sector. "There," he said, stabbing a finger at a shimmering anomaly. "An ancient wormhole nexus, left over from the First Galactic War. If we can lure Tharos and his fleet there, we can trigger a gravitational collapse, seal them on the other side for good." Mara frowned, chewing her lip. "That's all well and good, but we'd need bait. Something Tharos wants more than anything." Hicks met her gaze, his eyes like chips of flint. "He wants me." Hicks met Mara's gaze, his eyes hard as flint. "Let's do this." They sprang into action, fingers flying over consoles as they hacked into the Trylar comm network, using Zorkash's stolen credentials. Hicks took a deep breath, then opened a channel on all frequencies. "Tharos, you sadistic fuck," he snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is Will Hicks. You murdered my sister, tortured her to death while I watched. I'm coming for you, you hear me? I'm going to end you once and for all." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I have your precious bioweapon, the key to wiping out your entire depraved species. If you want it, if you want me, come and get me. I'll be waiting at the Ruxo wormhole nexus. Just you and me, Tharos. Settle this like men." Hicks cut the transmission, his heart hammering against his ribs. The die was cast, no turning back now. Mara's console pinged an alert. "Incoming signal, it's Tharos." The Nautican's scarred visage filled the view screen, his eyes burning with hate. "I accept your challenge, human," he spat. "But when I'm done with you, there won't be enough left to bury." Tharos barked orders at his crew. "Set course for the Ruxo Nexus. Summon the Armada. Today we crush the rebellion and mount Hicks's head on my wall." The screen went dark. Hicks and Mara shared a look of grim determination. Their gambit had worked. Now they just had to survive long enough to spring the trap. They worked frantically, contacting every rebel cell, every smuggler and mercenary who owed them favors. It was a pitiful force compared to the might of the Trylar war machine, but it would have to do. Beggars couldn't be choosers. The ragtag rebel fleet assembled at the rendezvous point, a scant light year from the swirling maelstrom of the wormhole. Hicks and Mara made the rounds, shaking hands, slapping backs, offering words of encouragement. They could see the fear in the fighters' eyes, the knowledge that this was likely a one-way trip. But there was courage there, too, a fierce determination to strike a blow against the hated Nausicaans, no matter the cost. Hicks clambered into the cockpit of a battered old Hellion fighter, Mara taking the gunner's seat behind him. He ran his hands over the controls, feeling the thrum of the engines through the flight stick. "Just like old times," he murmured. Mara squeezed his shoulder. "Let's give 'em hell." The proximity alarm shrieked. The Trylar Armada dropped out of warp, a vast wall of ships bristling with enough firepower to scorch a planet clean. At its heart loomed Tharos's flagship, an obsidian dagger aimed at the heart of the rebellion. "This is it," Hicks growled into the fleet-wide comms. "All ships engage! Buy us time!" He wrenched the Hellion into a steep climb, Mara whooping as they rocketed away from the main battle and streaked towards the wormhole. The flagship peeled away from the Armada, plasma cannons spitting fire as Tharos gave chase. "Hicks!" he roared over the comms. "I will peel the flesh from your bones and make your woman watch." Hicks hauled the Hellion into a barrel roll, barely avoiding a barrage that would have reduced them to slag. Mara returned fire, the Hellion's guns chattering. Molten tracers stitched the flagship's shields, but they held firm. The wormhole loomed before them, a swirling maelstrom of light and shadow. Hicks gritted his teeth, aiming the Hellion at its heart. Tharos matched him move for move, still spewing threats and hatred over the comms. "You want me, Tharos?" he called, his voice steady. "Come and get me." With a fierce battle cry, Hicks plunged the Hellion into the wormhole's gaping maw. Tharos followed, plasma cannons blazing. The two ships spiraled into the maelstrom, buffeted by waves of gravity and radiation. Reality bent and fractured around them, the laws of physics breaking down. Hicks could feel the wormhole tearing at his mind, shredding his sanity. But he held on to one image, one driving thought, his sister. Her face, her laugh. He would end this. For her. With a shout of defiance, Hicks slammed his fist down on the wormhole control matrix, activating the destabilization sequence. A blinding flash filled the cockpit, searing his retinas. The Hellion bucked like a wild bronco as the wormhole's event horizon collapsed in on itself. Tharos's flagship, still doggedly pursuing, vanished into the white-hot glare. Its hull shattered like glass as the wormhole went supernova, ripped apart by forces beyond comprehension. Hicks heard Tharos's final scream of rage and despair over the comms before the signal dissolved into static. The Hellion tumbled end over end, totally out of control. The wormhole was collapsing, the blinding light fading to a dull red emergency glow. Alarms shrieked, the hull groaning under the strain. Hicks fought with the dead controls, Mara shouting instructions from the back seat. With a bone-jarring impact, the Hellion punched through the far side of the wormhole a split second before it snapped shut. The fighter spun like a top, trailing smoke and debris. The planet below rushed up to meet them, its surface a blur of rock and ice. Hicks wrenched at the flight stick with all his strength, teeth bared in a desperate grimace. Mara fired the maneuvering thrusters, trying to level them out. The Hellion screamed through the upper atmosphere, friction turning the hull cherry red. At the last possible second, the emergency repulsors kicked in. The Hellion slowed fractionally, no longer in an uncontrolled tumble. Hicks aimed for a snow-covered plateau, praying to any god that would listen. They hit hard, the Hellion ploughing a 100-meter-long furrow in the snow before finally grinding to a halt. Hicks and Mara sat in stunned silence, amazed to be alive. Hicks reached over and took her hand, giving it a squeeze. She squeezed back, managing a shaky smile. With a hiss of depressurization, the cockpit canopy popped open. Hicks clambered out, Mara following. They stood side by side, taking in their surroundings. It was an alien vista of jutting rock and howling wind, the sky a strange mauve color. Wherever the wormhole had dumped them, it was far beyond the borders of known space. Hicks turned to her, a slow smile spreading across his face. Now we live. We won, Mara. Tharos is dead. The Nausicaans are broken." He pointed to the wreckage of the Hellion, its hull buckled and scorched but still intact. "And we've got a ship. It'll take some work, but we can get her flying again, find our way back to the fleet." Mara grinned, bumping her shoulder against his. "I love it when you talk dirty." Hicks laughed, pulling her into a fierce embrace. They held each other as the alien wind whipped around them, reveling in the simple fact of being alive, being together. There would be time to worry about the future later, time to mourn the fallen and rebuild what had been lost, but for now, in this moment, there was only the two of them. Two survivors. Two warriors. Two humans who had stared into the abyss and made it blink. Hicks took Mara's hand and together they turned towards the Hellion, ready to start the next chapter of their story. The Nausicaans had been put on notice. The rebellion lived, and Hicks and Mara would be there to see it through to the end, come what may. Tharos lunged, swinging a clawed fist at Hicks's head. Hicks ducked under the blow and drove his shoulder into the Nausicaa's gut, slamming him against the bulkhead. Tharos grunted but lashed out, raking his talons across Hicks's back, shredding through his pressure suit. Hicks roared in pain, feeling hot blood run down his spine. He reeled away, snatching up a jagged shard of metal. Tharos charged, a deep growl rumbling in his barrel chest. Hicks sidestepped and rammed the makeshift spear into the Nausicaa's side, punching through the gap in his armor. Tharos bellowed, black ichor gushing from the wound. The Nausicaan seized the metal shard and ripped it free with a wet sucking sound, flinging it away. He backhanded Hicks across the face, splitting his lip and filling his mouth with the coppery taste of blood. Hicks staggered, stars exploding across his vision. Tharos pressed his advantage, clamping his claws around Hicks' throat and slamming him to the deck. Hicks scrabbled at the durasteel grip, desperately trying to break free as his lungs screamed for air. Tharos leered down at him, fangs bared in a vicious grin. "Pathetic human," he spat, flecks of spittle spattering Hicks's face. "I will take my time with you. Peel the flesh from your bones inch by agonizing inch. I will make a trophy of your skull." Hicks glared up at Tharos with pure, unfettered hatred. "Fuck you," he rasped. His questing fingers closed around a fist-sized chunk of rubble. With the last of his strength, he smashed it into Tharos's temple. The Nausicaan reeled back with an agonized howl, his grip loosening. Hicks surged up and rammed his boot into Tharos's knee, feeling the joint pop. Tharos stumbled and Hicks pressed his attack, raining down a flurry of punches that cracked the Nausicaan's jaw and snapped a tusk. Tharos thrashed, hurling Hicks away. The human hit the bulkhead hard enough to rattle his teeth. Tharos limped towards him, murder in his eyes, ichor dribbling down his chin. "I will feast on your entrails," the Nausicaan roared, raising his claws for a killing blow. Hicks scrabbled backwards, his hand landing on a familiar cylindrical object, the bioweapon. It must have been jarred loose in the crash. Tharos loomed over him, a titan of hate and rage. Hicks looked up at his tormentor, his nemesis, his sister's murderer. A cold, clear calm settled over him. He knew what he had to do. "Ellie, this is for you," he whispered. Then he rammed the bioweapon into Tharos's gaping maw and hit the activation switch. The Nausicaan's eyes flew wide as a wicked hiss filled the air. Thin wisps of smoke began to curl from his nostrils and eye sockets. Tharos convulsed, a keening wail tearing from his throat as the viral payload flooded his system, ravaging his body on a cellular level. Hicks watched dispassionately as the Nausicaan warlord collapsed, his flesh sloughing away, his limbs spasming. In seconds, all that remained was a pile of steaming, putrid sludge. The monster who had haunted Hicks' nightmares, who had taken everything from him, was no more. Hicks slumped back against the bulkhead, his whole body throbbing with pain. Every breath was agony, his vision starting to tunnel. He knew he needed medical attention, and soon. The clatter of boots on deck plates made him look up. Mara staggered into view, her face bruised and bloody, but her eyes alight with fierce joy. She took in the scene, Hicks broken and battered, Tharos's remains sizzling on the deck, and her lips quirked in a weary grin. "Knew you had it in you, Hicks. Come on, let's get you patched up. We've got a rebellion to win." She reached down and clasped his hand, hauling him to his feet. Together they limped towards the escape pods, leaving the nightmarish wreckage of the wormhole nexus behind. There would be time to rest, to heal, to mourn the fallen. But not yet. Not while the Trylar Empire still cast its shadow across the stars. Hicks glanced sidelong at Mara, taking in her proud, defiant profile. Somehow, against all odds, they had survived, and as long as they had each other, as long as the flame of resistance still burned, there was hope. The road ahead would be long and hard and treacherous, but Hicks had a feeling they were just getting started. The entire ship lurched and groaned, bulkheads shattering as Hicks and Tharos smashed through them. They grappled in the shuddering corridor as sparks rained down from ruptured power conduits. Tharos lashed out with clawed fists, his superior Nausicaan strength and speed a deadly advantage. But Hicks fought with savage cunning, rolling with the blows and giving as good as he got. They crashed into a sparking control panel. Tharos slamming Hicks' head against the flickering screens. Hicks drove his knee into the Nausicaa's groin and grabbed a fistful of torn cables, jamming them into Tharos's neck. The alien roared as electricity crackled over his hide. Hicks shoved him away and scrambled across the deck, snatching up a jagged shard of metal. As Tharos lunged for him, Hicks whirled and buried it to the hilt in the Nausicaa's eye. Tharos reeled back with an agonized howl, viscous ichor spurting from the wound. Enraged, he seized Hicks in a crushing grip and clamped his fangs on the human's shoulder. Hicks screamed as the serrated teeth shredded his flesh, Tharos shaking him like a rag doll. Hicks pounded his fists into Tharos's snout, feeling the bone shatter beneath his knuckles. The Nausicaan snarled wetly, but refused to release his grip. Hicks gouged his thumbs into Tharos's remaining eye until the alien tore free with a spray of blood. The two combatants staggered apart, chests heaving. Hicks swayed on his feet, a dozen deep wounds weeping crimson. His vision swam, the edges going grey. Tharos was in equally rough shape, his armor hanging in tatters, black ichor oozing from his mangled face. "Give up, Hicks," Tharos slurred through broken fangs. "You cannot win." Hicks spat a broken tooth at the Nausicaa's feet, a mad grin splitting his blood-caked features. "Funny," he rasped. "I was about to say the same to you." With a defiant bellow, Hicks charged forward and slammed into Tharos like a battering ram. The impact sent them crashing through a weakened bulkhead in a tangle of limbs. They smashed onto the deck of a massive hangar bay in a shower of twisted metal. All around them, escape pods were blasting free of the dying ship. Hicks caught a glimpse of Mara waving frantically to him from an open pod. "Will, come on," she shouted. Hicks dragged himself to his feet, his whole body screaming in agony. Behind him, Tharos scrabbled at the deck plates, trying to rise on shattered legs. The Nausicaan fixed his remaining eye on Hicks, insane hatred blazing in its depths. "This isn't over," Tharos hissed. "I will hunt you to the ends of the universe." Hicks looked down at his battered nemesis, an eerie calm descending over him. "No, Tharos, you won't." Turning his back on the Nausicaan, Hicks sprinted for Mara's pod with the last of his strength. He leaped for the hatch, Mara grabbing his arms and hauling him inside. A second later, the hangar bay doors blew out, and the pod launched into the void. Behind them, Tharos's flagship disintegrated into a massive debris field, the twisted wreckage spinning away into the cold depths of space. The escape pod shuddered violently as it tumbled through the roiling debris field, alarms wailing and control panels sparking. Hicks clung to the restraints, his teeth rattling in his skull. Through the viewport, he saw the wormhole nexus collapse in on itself, a blinding implosion of shattered spacetime that seared his retinas. The Trylar warships, once so proud and mighty, crumpled like cheap aluminum foil as the hungry gravity well dragged them to oblivion. It was like watching the hand of an angry god crumple up and discard the ships like garbage. Beside him, Mara watched the destruction with exhausted eyes, her face bathed in the eldritch light. The moment seemed to stretch into eternity as the last Trylar vessel vanished into the maelstrom, the gravitational forces ripping it apart down to the last atom. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The wormhole snapped shut with a silent thunderclap, leaving only a spinning accretion disk of molten metal and exotic radiation. Hicks exhaled slowly, not quite believing what he'd just witnessed. They'd done it, they'd won. The Trylar Empire was broken, its beating heart ripped out and crushed, but the victory tasted like ashes in his mouth. He thought of Terex, the grizzled commander who'd given his life to buy them time, of the countless rebel pilots who'd fought and died in the cold void of space, never knowing if their sacrifice would make a difference. Their blood was on his hands now, a stain that would never wash clean. Hicks clenched his jaw, his eyes burning with unshed tears. Hicks nodded mechanically, but the words rang hollow in his ears. He knew deep in his bones that this fight was far from over. The Trylar Empire was crippled, its leadership decapitated, but it was not dead. There would be other Tharoses, other cruel tyrants eager to fill the power vacuum left behind, and he would be there to meet them, a battered soldier with a blade in his fist and fire in his heart. It was his purpose, his calling, the only thing he knew how to do. A shrill proximity alert jolted Hicks from his dark ruminations. He glanced up to see a rebel frigate gliding towards their battered escape pod, its pitted hull pockmarked by laser scars and micro-meteoroid impacts. Mara grinned, her teeth startlingly white in her soot-smudged face. "Looks like our ride's here." Hicks watched as the frigate extended docking clamps, latching onto their pod and reeling it in. A slightly hysterical laugh bubbled up in his throat. Against all odds, they'd survived. They were alive. The pod shuddered as it was dragged into the frigate's landing bay, the abused hull groaning. With a hiss of releasing pressure, the hatch cycled open. Rebel soldiers swarmed forward to help them out, their faces alight with joy and relief. Hicks allowed himself to be pulled from the pod, his boots hitting the deck with a hollow clang. All around him, soldiers were cheering, clapping each other on the back, some even weeping openly. But even as he was swept up in the tide of celebration, Hicks couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Trylar Empire was beaten, but as long as there were those willing to trade freedom for power, the fight would never truly be over. He would be there, standing tall against the darkness, a light for those who couldn't fight for themselves, for his sister, for Terex, for all the fallen. Hicks squared his shoulders and stepped forward into an uncertain future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. It was who he was, who he would always be. He was Will Hicks, a hero to the bitter end. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.